I want you to think about the last time you were walking somewhere. Doesn't matter where, to class, to a cafe, to your kitchen at midnight. And there was a song playing in your earphones. And just for a second, you felt it. Like your life had a soundtrack. Like the moment meant something. Like there was a camera on you.
I do this embarrassingly often. This morning, I was actually walking to get some groceries. Right? Nothing had happened yet. It was like around 8 a.m. And in my head, I was fully narrating it.
At 8 a.m., going to get groceries.
Well, the groceries was for a very boring reason, but in my head, it was cinematic.
And you know what? That feeling has a name now. Main character energy. Main character syndrome. Living like you're the protagonist. And we have all been handed two ticks on it. Either it is beautiful, romanticize your life, embrace yourself, walk like you own the plot. Or it's cringe. It's narcissism. It's self delusion. It's this generation thinks everything is about them. And Varun, I've sat with both those takes. I think they're both wrong.
Bold claim for the first 90 seconds of our very first episode.
We're starting strong because the question isn't whether main character energy is good or bad. The question, the one nobody's asking is, what kind of a story are you actually living? And who decided which role you get to play?
Welcome to Think Now podcast. I am Varun Karthik.
And I'm Abhishek. Every episode we take one idea that's living rent free in everybody's head. Something you have felt but never had the exact words for, and we go all the way in. Today, the main character mindset. What the psychology actually says. What it does to you when you get it wrong. And the thing we think everyone is generally missing about it. Let's go.
Okay, so where did this thing even come from? Main character energy, as a concept.
It blew up on TikTok around 2020, and the original version was actually kind of sweet. It was just put your headphones in, walk somewhere, pretend you're the protagonist of a film, and suddenly your Tuesday has a plot. People posted these videos of themselves doing completely ordinary things, watering plants, making tea with sweeping cinematic music underneath, and millions of people watched and felt something
Because most of the time, life doesn't feel cinematic. It feels flat. Like nothing's really happening, and this gave you a way to inject meaning into the ordinary.
Exactly, and here's the thing that impulse, psychologically valid. There's a whole field of research on this called narrative identity. The theory that we don't just live our lives, we narrate them. We take these disconnected, random experiences and stitch them into a story within ourselves at the center. And that's not vanity, that's survival. That's how the brain makes sense of what happens to us.
So, the brain isn't recording your life like a camera. Instead, it's writing it like a novel.
Exactly, and the psychologist Dan McAdams spent decades on it. He found that the people with strong, coherent personal narrative have better mental health, more resilience, more sense of purpose. So, the feeling like a protagonist of your own life? Healthy. The desire to experience your life as meaningful? Human. Ancient? Nothing new about our generation.
Then why does main character syndrome get used as an insult? Like what went wrong between the healthy version and the cringe version?
Okay, there's basically a simple concept behind it. So there's a concept in psychology called the imaginary audience effect, coined in 1967 by a psychologist named David Elkind, and essentially is the thing most teenagers go through when you feel like everyone is watching you. You drop a fork in the canteen, you think the entire room saw it, you have a weird hair day, you're convinced every single person is judging it. Elkind called it imaginary because the audience isn't real. Nobody is actually focused on you. It's just developmental phase.
Whoa, I spent so much of school convinced everyone was watching me. And they were. They were just watching themselves.
Well, everyone is too busy with their own imaginary audience to be part of yours. But here where it gets real. This imaginary audience effect is supposed to fade as you move into adulthood. The research shows it weakens through your late teens. But nobody's accounted for this. What happens when you hand every 13-year-old a phone with an Instagram account and a real life counted audience? The imaginary audience becomes real. And it never got a chance to fade.
We grew up with a developmental phase that was supposed to be temporary and we made it permanent. And we also built an app for it.
And then we call ourselves narcissists for struggling with it. Which, by the way, the research doesn't even support. There was a major academic review in 2025 that looked at decades of narcissism data and found that the evidence for a narcissism epidemic among young people is genuinely weak. And here's my favorite part. Studies show that when young people are called narcissistic, they feel hurt and offended. The only people comfortable with the label? The ones who actually score high on narcissism scales. Which means if you hate being called self obsessed, you're probably not.
I need that in writing because for my every family gathering actually.
Also, for your enlightenment, Aristotle was writing about how arrogant and self important young people were in 350 BCE, before Christ. Every generation does this to the next. The only genuinely new thing about Gen Z is that the technology for self performance arrived at the exact same moment. Identity was mostly fragile. That's not a character flaw, that's an experiment no generation has ever had to run before.
Okay, so I want to be honest about something because I think I have lived both versions of main character energy, and the line between them is something I couldn't see while I was in it. There was a version that felt genuinely good. I was making my own choices. I stopped shrinking around people. I stopped waiting for permission to want things. That felt real.
That's the healthy version. Narrative ownership. Being the author of your own choices instead of just waiting to see what happens to you. That's what the psychology actually says. It's good.
But then there was another version, and I didn't notice it happening. I'd be in a moment, like a really good moment, and instead of being in it, I was already narrating it, planning the caption, thinking about how I would describe it later to other persons, and the actual experience, I was barely there for it.
Okay, so there's a psychological concept for this self referential processing. Basically, the part of your brain that thinks about yourself. In the right amount, it's healthy, it helps you reflect, understand who you are. But there's a tipping point. When you're so focused on observing yourself that you stop actually inhabiting your own experience. You shift from living in the inside to watch from the outside. And researchers link that tipping point to anxiety and a specific kind of emptiness. Feeling like you're living your best life and feeling nothing at the same time.
I had that exact experience. Like, I had the pictures, I had the moments that looked right, and I felt completely hollow. And you can't say that to anyone because from the outside, you're just thriving.
And there's a second trap that's even harder to see. There's a sociologist named Charles Cooley who came up with the idea of looking glass self in 1902 before social media existed. The idea is that your identity isn't built from the inside out. It forms by seeing yourself through other people's eyes. You imagine how you appear to others. You imagine their judgment and you feel good or bad about yourself based on that reflection. Now, imagine that theory meeting Instagram's like count. You're not just imagining how people see you anymore, and you have a number in real time telling you the exact same thing.
And you refresh it.
And you refresh it, and your sense of self adjusts accordingly. That's the thing that makes the perform version of main character energy genuinely damaging. Not because it's selfish, but because you've outsourced your own story to an algorithm.
Algorithm, right. Okay, I want to completely flip this because we've been talking about the trap of too much main character energy, right? But I think there's a whole other half of this conversation. Because every person who gets lost in their own story, there is someone who doesn't even know they're allowed to have one.
What does it look like?
Okay, so it looks like people who differ on everything, right? Where do you want to eat? Wherever, I don't mind. What do you actually want for yourself? I'm easy. And at first, it reads as being considerate, being chill. But the more you look, they have opinions. They just act like their opinion is somehow less valid than everyone else's. Like their preference doesn't really count in the room.
There's a clinical term for this sociotrophy. Basically, excessive prioritization of everyone else's needs over your own. And what drives it? Almost universally is fear. The fear that if you actually take up space, if you say what you want, if you disagree, if you're too loud, too much, too honest, you will be abandoned, you will be rejected. So the brain offers a workaround. Make yourself small, be easy, let other people be the main character, safer that way.
And you know what? The world rewards you for it. People call you so low maintenance, so easy to be around, you get praised for shrinking.
Praised for disappearing, and here's the part which I think is really important to say. This usually doesn't come from nowhere. Researchers who study people pleasing find it almost always traces back to early environment where love or approval is conditional. Maybe warmth came when you were agreeable and went cold when you had needs. Maybe conflict ended badly every time, so you stop initiating it. Maybe being too nervous was explicitly or quietly punished, and the child who is smart and adaptive and trying to survive learns the strategy. Make yourself smaller. It works, it keeps you safe, and then suddenly you're 22 and the strategy is still running, and you don't even notice it anymore because it just feels like your personality.
The thing I thought was just who I am might actually be the smartest decision a much younger version of me made, and then forgot to update.
Exactly, it was a survival strategy, not a personality trait. And the moment you see that distinction, even just intellectually, something shifts. Because you can't change what you think is permanent, but you can update it when you understand as a pattern.
Right. And then someone posts a reel saying, just have the main character energy, bro. And you're like, I genuinely do not know what that means for me. Because I've never practiced wanting things out loud. I've never sat in a room and thought, this moment is mine. I'm allowed to be fully in it.
Which is why the social media version of this conversation will never be enough. It just skips the question of how you got here, and if you don't know how you got here, you can't actually get somewhere different. You just perform a different role on the same stage.
Okay, so where does that leave us? Because I feel like we've been pulled apart from the main character thing pretty thoroughly, and I want to know where to actually land it.
Okay, so here's the thing. The entire main character framework uses a film metaphor, and I think that the film metaphor itself is a problem. Because in a film, there's one main character. Everyone else is supporting the cast. They feel things, but those feelings exist to advance the protagonist's story. This is the structure. And if I apply that structure to real life, even just as a way of thinking, you end up with only two options. Either you are the star who is gradually stopping, seeing the people around them, or you're the supporting cast who has been waiting their whole life for a scene that's actually theirs.
And most people don't want either of those. They just want to feel like their life is real and worth something.
So here's the best advice. Don't try to be the main character. Try to be the author.
Okay, like, so what does it actually mean?
The author cares about every actor in the story. The author knows that the person who just walked past you, the one you barely noticed, is living something just as layered and real and important as you are. An author can write themselves fully and boldly without erasing everyone else. And an author is always making choices. They're not waiting for a plot to carry them somewhere. They're not performing for an imaginary audience. They're just writing, honestly, without needing to know how it looks from the outside.
And for someone who feels like a side character, this is actually the biggest shift, right? Because a side character has no agency. The story happens to them, but an author always has a pen. Even if you have been writing yourself into the margins for years, even if you have been making yourself smaller since you were a child, the pen is still yours. It was always yours.
The pen was always yours, yes. And it doesn't mean suddenly performing confidence you don't have. It doesn't mean walking differently or talking more. It just means quietly, internally beginning to believe that your story deserves to be written. That's your presence in a room is not a burden or imposition. That's the life happening inside you is real enough to take it seriously.
The most alive I've ever felt, the moments where I actually thought, yeah, this is my life. This is real. They weren't the moments I was performing. They weren't the moments I looked good or the captions were great. They were the moments where I was fully present in something that I forgot to narrate it. A conversation where I actually heard the other person. A meal where I just ate the food. A walk where I just walked. The camera went off, and somehow that's when it felt most like mine.
That's it. That's the whole thing, actually. The irony of the main character energy is that the more you perform the story, the more you try to make it look like a life, the less you actually live it. And the moment you stop performing, that's when the story becomes real.
So, whether you've been out too loud in your own story or too quiet in it, the answer is always the same thing. Come back to the actual moment, to the actual people, to the actual version of you that exists when nobody is watching and you're not watching yourself either. That person, whoever that is, that's your main character. They've been there the whole time.
They've been there the whole time.
So, this is Think Now Podcast. Thank you for being here on our very first episode. We mean that genuinely. You didn't have to be here, you chose to spend time with us. And we don't take that lightly.
If something today shifted something, even just slightly, Send it to that one person who might need it. That's the only thing we'll ever ask. See you next time. Bye bye.